in my own career, and indeed in the lifetime of Hartley McMaster, which is a company I set up 20 years ago, we've actually probably done projects in every single one of those fields that was identified. I've picked one out today, which actually I think probably ticks two of the boxes from the types of projects. And hopefully it will illustrate the type of project you could get involved in and what a typical OR researcher, OR worker's involvement in that project would be. Which way is going to go forward? There. I did actually say I wanted to call this Open All Hours, but apparently that was mildly too flippant for the programme today. This is a piece of work that we did I think probably about 5 years ago now. I just choose it because I think it's such a good example of how OR gets applied to these sorts of things. One of our large customers over the years has been Vodafone, in particular the retail side of Vodafone. Clearly when Vodafone are selling services, they have a retail chain, which is, I should have checked this morning to see how many shops they have, but it's about 350 stores in the UK in high street locations. So that part of Vodafone looks very much like a retail organisation. Clearly they have an online presence, they have telecentres, etc. that you can deal with. The way that Vodafone have structured themselves is they will have a corporate strategy of how much they want to sell, what they want to sell, then they will split it down into the different channels through which they want to sell it. We've done a lot of work, say, with the retail side, a little bit with the phone centres. Why choose this one? Well, I think it's a very good example of how OR can be used in a practical way. From our own company's point of view, it's actually pretty typical of the size of project that we get involved in. This particular project, in fact, it was myself doing it and one of our graduate entrants. So they'd probably been with the company about 6 months when they started work full-time on this project with myself. And it was about 6 months in duration. Yes, this project is a little bit long in the tooth because I think the work was, we did some work in 2005 and some in 2006, a little bit in 2007. But I actually think there was an advertising campaign just recently for NatWest Bank where they were telling you that they are very, very wonderful people. And one of the wonderful things they do, they say, is they've changed the opening time of all of their bank branches so that they fit in with exactly when you want to do your banking. That problem was the problem that we were looking at 5-6 years ago with Vodafone. Where we lead, the banks follow. Okay, the problem as it was 5-6 years ago, at that stage Vodafone had 339 stores in the UK. They say typically these are high street stores. You've probably all been into a very similar store. They do vary in size a little bit. Their largest store, certainly at that stage, was on Oxford Street in London and was on 2 floors, but most of them are fairly standard retail units in a high street. They always like to site them near a Marks and Spencer's, because apparently Marks and Spencer's gets people onto high streets. They have to walk past Vodafone, they might come in. So if you ever want to open a shop on a high street, that's a tip. Virtually all of their stores, irrespective of where they were, traded pretty much the same hours at that stage, opening at 9, closing at 5:30, except on a Tuesday where they opened at 9:30 for half an hour staff training. Usually, and that was Monday to Saturday. At that stage, again, a relatively small proportion of their stores traded on a Sunday. I think about 10-15% of their stores traded on a Sunday. It had occurred to Vodafone that they did this because that's what high street shops did. They opened at 9, they closed at 5:30. That's how it had always been done, but was this the right thing? A lot of the work we'd actually done before that was about making sure they had the right numbers of staff in the stores for the hours they traded. But then they turned the problem around and said, well, what hours should we be opening the stores? We had done all the work with them. They came to us and said, would we be able to help with this? And if we could, what would we need? Again, tying in very much with what was said the previous speaker, Vodafone are a very data-rich organisation. Particularly in their retail side, they use electronic points of sale, they use electronic tills, all of that information goes into databases. So we could almost have our pick of how much data we wanted to actually take this project forward. We thought we'd go minimalist on it and ask for every sales transaction from every store for 12 months. They could have given us more. If we wanted more, we could have had 2 years, etc. But we felt you should be able to see all of the seasonal trends, you should be able to see pretty much all the patterns in 1 year's worth of data from 339 stores. Getting it physically from their machines onto ours was a little bit more fun, but we achieved that. What they also were willing to do, and this just echoes totally what was said before, the data can only tell you so much. You also need to understand something about the business and the process that's behind it. So we had already actually had quite a track record of going out and working in Vodafone stores. We got access to any and everyone that we needed to speak to in the stores to get the interpretation of that data. So what did they want to know? Well, first of all, if you're going to start messing around with your trading hours, you want to know that you're doing that in a way that's, and you're going to base this perhaps on sales data. Do sales data actually tally with when people turn up in shops? Now that sounds like a daft question, but at the time it wasn't necessarily totally daft, because do people go window shopping first? So do they actually go in and go around a whole series of stores, and once they've actually made those comparisons, come back and make a purchase? So the fact that we had a lot of sales data that said when did transactions go through on the tills, that might not be the same as when do people go to shops and when do they want them open. We only knew when they made their purchases. So question number one was, do the sales correlate with customer visits? Secondly, are the sales patterns the same in all of their stores? Their locations are pretty similar. They're pretty much all on high streets or in large shopping centres. Do you see the same pattern geographically? But more importantly to them, they group their stores into 5 bands in terms of the traditional amount of sales in those stores. Does a big store have a very different profile to a small store? So if you're going to look at this and if you're going to come up with algorithms for changing the hours, is it 1 algorithm? Is it 5 algorithms? Thirdly, Sunday trading. They got a few stores where they'd opened them really because they felt other stores in the same location were trading on a Sunday. They probably ought to, because it would look bad. If Carphone Warehouse were trading on a Sunday, we better trade on a Sunday. But they hadn't really got a clear answer on, if you open a store on a Sunday, does that mean that you take a week's sales that you used to get in 6 days and spread it out over 7 days, or do you actually get extra sales? Because it could be that if you're doing, all you're doing is spreading it out, then it's a lot less attractive to actually pay extra staff time to open stores if your amount of sales isn't going to go up. So we needed to look at that. But basically, they wanted to be able to sell at least the same, if not more, with at least the same, if not less, staff time was the aim. So they're looking for increasing sale, increasing efficiency of making that sale. Well, there we are, yes, the data. We had all of their sales database for a year from their retail side. We had all of the trading hours of the stores. We had all of the store banding, so we knew not just where the store was, but according to their own analysis, what sort of size of store it was. We also had to have some information about contractual constraints, because in the real world, of course, in fact, most of the stores that didn't traditionally trade 9 till 5:30 were not trading at those hours because contractually they were told they had to open different hours. If you're in a shopping arcade, a shopping mall, then part of your lease actually says what hours you have to trade, because they don't want shut-looking shops in there. They want everyone open at the same sort of time. And it might also mean, though, that contractually they couldn't change their hours, even if we suggested they might. But so we had all of those. We also got footfall data, i.e. How many customers came in at what time from 20 of the stores. They got little laser beam things. As you walk in and out the store, it counts. I did flippantly ask what happened if one-legged people, whether we'd actually had to do a survey, or indeed if people happened to just jump as they came in, how high would they have to jump? But apparently it was pretty reliable data. I believe, this is 5-6 years ago, they had 20 stores. I think it's actually every store now. They know exactly how many people come in and go out. So if you all start hurtling through doors or whatever, I know it's my fault. We had access to any of the stores if we wanted clarification of their data or if we wanted clarification of their processes. I think it's actually relatively unusual to have quite such high quality data. For many of the jobs that we do now, the quality of the data, I would say, was probably not as good as this. But it was an impressive data set that we had to work with, and a very, very positive attitude and helpful attitude from the customer. So what did we find? Well, the first graph, which you can just about see, I think, this is the dark blue line. The one that stands out is actually the footfall data. I can't remember how many weeks worth we took to actually get this. But we've got an interesting picture there. One for this particular store. Many stores actually have a trading pattern known as Twin Peaks. They have a big rise round lunchtime when people nip out to the shops to do the shopping, and then a later one. Obviously for this particular store they didn't have the later one. But what we've actually got, I mean it's very difficult to see, I apologise, but we've got data here for the footfall in the blue. Then we've got sales of accessories, contracts, prepay phones, top-ups and upgrades. So we knew what type of transaction was going through, not just when it was going through, and we plotted those. And it was, well, actually incredibly reassuring, because you could see there was a very strong correlation between footfall and the sales patterns. So that made us very confident that we could actually use the sales data as a very clear measure of when customers were going into the stores. What we also liked was, it's again very difficult to see, but the yellow line here is actually offset by about half an hour from the footfall. One of the things we've been doing is a lot of work on rostering, and we'd been timing how long typically contracts take to do. And we just told them the year before they should allow half an hour for doing a contract sale from somebody coming in. So this was great, because that actually did back up all of the work that we'd done before, and we could actually see it from their own footfall data. So, as I say, this was a minor part of the work we did, but it was actually very reassuring, because it told us that what we were, the assumption we'd made, the sales data tied in very much with when customers were wanting and going into stores, that was good. So what did we do? Well, there was a huge amount of processing of that sales data that went on. Massive processing runs, trying to take out elements of seasonality in there. I mean, Vodafone's picture, which is probably fairly similar to most high street places, December is their busiest month by a long, long way, and January generally their quietest month, because phones obviously seen as good Christmas presents. They get a huge surge through. So what you shouldn't do if you're looking for a typical pattern is take either December or January. You've got to look at a typical picture and try and get something that looks a credible, seasonally adjusted set of sales figures out of it. We then took that and broke it down to get typical figures for trading on, in fact, half-hourly basis, just to fit it in on this particular diagram. Most of the time periods marked in white are hours. The ones in grey are half hours, and these were seen as the key parts of the day when they were interested in those, because they're the ones where they were most likely to be wanting to make changes. What we also had to do was work with the finance folk and get some sort of typical value for what is a transaction, a typical top-up. How much is it? £5, £10? What is it? What's a typical contract worth? What's a typical upgrade worth? Because they were interested really in the amount of money. They didn't really mind if they had a smaller number of people spending a lot more money. They just wanted to make sure that for their high value, high revenue stream contributors, that the stores were going to be open at the right time. So I'm afraid to say, if for those people who perennially, our company offices are actually directly above a Vodafone shop in St Albans, and every morning as I get in, very early obviously, there are always people waiting to do the top-ups on their phone, which is crazy because they can do them in lots of other places or do them online. But those are seen as very low value, and you wouldn't want to say, well, we've got to actually open our stores an awful lot earlier, because look, we got 3 top-ups at 8:30 in the morning and then nothing till lunchtime. So they were looking for the high value as well as the frequency. So we worked out these are a sort of not quite normalised, but standardised set of units which actually take into account the different types of transaction as well as the different numbers. And so for a particular store, whichever number 6932 is, this was their typical trading pattern. And so the top part, the green and red, that shows we again agreed with Vodafone effectively a threshold for trading. What constituted profitable trading, what constituted below threshold, unprofitable trading. And so the green was profitable, the red was unprofitable. And then in our analysis, there was an awful lot more to it than just a spreadsheet, I assure you. But in this, there were 2 things that were particularly of interest. And one was these ones shown in yellow. Now, those are time slots that were, there was unprofitable trading going on. And so those were the ones we were looking for to say, well, really, particularly if they're right at the start or right at the end of the day, it's actually pretty easy to trim those off. The ones in purple are actually really quite interesting, because these ones in particular, because this is trading outside of the hours this shop was open. And what that means is one of 2 things. Either the staff store up a lot of the paperwork around doing a transaction, and once the door of the store shut, they push it through the system because they've been busy during the day, or they've got customers who've made it into the store just before 5:30 and are actually being dealt with, and so the transactions are coming through then. Well, if you've got a late rush of people coming in at 5:30 and wanting to spend decent money, perhaps you should stay open till 6, was the sort of logic that went with it. So this sort of, and in this particular case, the store, we've estimated by comparing this store in terms of its characteristics with a series of stores that are trading already on a Sunday. We estimated what sort of trading they would get on a Sunday, and was it likely to be viable or not? Was it going to be above their threshold? And so in this case we felt it was, and so we said, we think you're missing sales as well down here. We did this for all of their 339 stores. So we went through this, and at the end of it, we came up with proposed revised trading hours for every UK store. I'm quite used to coming in and doing presentations where the client going to have is going to put this into a report which will go to this committee to be considered as to whether we're going to actually make these changes. And so I got asked to do a presentation one Friday lunchtime as we got towards the end of this. I was at Vodafone's headquarters in Newbury. Somebody said, actually, could you come and just do a quick presentation on the results? We've got a few people that would be interested in it. Stepped into a room, started the presentation, and I was starting with a very learned discussion of how we'd gone about doing the modelling and all the quality checks we'd done. And one of the guys sitting in the middle put his hand up and said, no. He said, no, I believe you know how to do the numbers. He said, which stores should we trade on a Sunday? And I said, well, what the model says is no. He said, which stores should we trade on a Sunday? I said, well, we've ranked them in order of what we think are the ones that are most likely to get a really good trading performance on Sundays. And he said, well, show me the ranking. And the top 2, I think, were Richmond on Thames, and there was another one very similar, somewhere out in southwest London. And this guy turned around to the guy and said, do you know, I live just down the road from those. I've always wondered why we don't trade these stores on a Sunday. He said, open them. He was actually the managing director of Vodafone UK. And back in on the Monday morning, so that was Friday lunchtime, Monday morning, I bumped into his sidekick, his fixer, and he said, oh, by the way, we opened those stores on Sunday. He said, they traded quite well done. And you think, oh my goodness me, we're actually going to have some real impact here. They're not going to think about this, they're going to do it. We made predictions as to where we thought they should trade and justified them by saying, we think you will see these things happening to your sales. We didn't predict the actual sales level, but we said, we think you should be seeing typically increased sales at these time periods. We did present these, we did get a formal chance to present them again to the board, who just said, do it. Okay, we'll accept all of the recommendations, which is really quite a nerve-wracking thing when you suddenly think, oh, so you really are going to change this. And I went and checked with the Vodafone store downstairs, and they said, we just had this email saying we're going to have to change our trading hours. I said, whoa, that's terrible, I don't know how that happened. We were asked to come back a year later. Actually, they were so happy with the way things had gone. It's only recently that we've been allowed to tell other people about it, because they felt this gave them really quite a commercial advantage, certainly compared to other phone companies. Those are they're particularly against. The other thing we did, and I am desperately running out of time, we also went through and we revised all of the rostering to fit in with those times. So we said to them, what number of staff should you have, given what we're forecasting your trading patterns are going to look like under the new revised hours, how many staff should you have? This could also be constrained because they also knew how many they were willing to have. Plus there were also various health and safety and legal requirements that we had to take in. So we did do the rostering as well. That's a big piece of work that I'm just skipping past. We came back a year later because they did say they'd quite like to have a look at the data again and make sure that it had all sounded good and they were happy with it, but did it really pay off? This time we just took the first 6 months of trading data rather than the full year. At the time, and I think it's probably still the case, high street sales, partly because of other channels like the internet, buying things out from their telecentres, there was actually quite a lot of pressure in the high street in general that high street sales were starting to decline. So we reviewed our figures in the light of that, thinking, oh, I hope they haven't gone in the wrong direction. And it was a real success story. Just taking one example here, what we're comparing there, these are their 5 bands of stores, and there are just 2 slightly different statistics, if you like, from it. The pattern's the same. Apart from their really smallest stores, which were struggling in general, all of their other band stores had seen increased sales at a time where the high street in general were seeing decreased sales. So they were pretty happy about that. The amount that we reduced, by going back and looking to see how much of their time they were trading their stores below that agreed threshold, we'd actually got all of the stores showing that we'd reduced the amount of trading below threshold that had been done. Those are actually pretty impressive results to get from it, and they were pretty happy that we'd managed to do that. So I think that's a good example of a really practical project. I'd love to say, all come and talk to us about the exciting careers we have. I'd like to make it clear now, we generally take 1 or 2 graduates a year, so we won't be able to take everyone here today. But we do get involved in a lot of the things that you're studying now and that you're looking at. We, and other consultancies, and indeed the BAs, the Tesco's, etc. of this world, all make these, use these to do real things with them. I actually enjoyed that piece of work. It did frighten me when we actually had to present it, and somebody said that we're actually going to do something with it. We do a lot of work for government as well, who generally don't do anything with any reports that you get. Well, not for about 5 or 10 years. To actually find out that one weekend later they started implementing your findings was a bit of a shock to the system, but a really enjoyable one. I actually found that very rewarding, that you got that feedback. What got done in there is not rocket science. We weren't developing brand new mathematical techniques. we were generally using, in fact, totally using, we customized, we build things in VBA and other programming languages to supplement a lot of the standard analysis you could do in Excel or Access or any of the other standard tools. So there was nothing in there that was particularly special about techniques or tools, but it was a very interesting piece of work.